your goal is to sell the business for all cash, you're going to get a lower valuation because there's no risk mitigation for the buyer of the business.
It's continuing to kind of escalate your risk appetite and how much you're trying to kind of maximize the full potential value. If you have a little bit of leverage as a seller, you know, like, hey, I'm the really pretty girl at the dance, let's be honest, you can probably be a little more aggressive in your asks.
Not selling the whole value of your business. There's a reality where you could just sell a minority share of your business.
It's like owning the whole grape or half the watermelon. Welcome to Entry and Exit. My name's Stephen Olmon, and I also have Collin Trimble with me, who is my business partner and co-host. We created this podcast to provide practical and tactical advice to people trying to grow and scale security and life safety businesses.
What I think our listeners should know is that we just did 4.5 takes to try to get through this opening, even though we've done how many videos at this point? Do you think how many episodes? 30?
Like 25.
Yeah.
I have a lot on my mind.
And
today,
you crushed
okay?
the takes every time, but we did a few. There was bird noises involved. I'm not really sure.
Okay. Just lighten up a little bit. All right.
Okay, we're jumping in. So this morning this spun out of a conversation that we've been having with a lot of folks in the industry that we've been just got back from ISC West, but also even before that, like we just have this conversation a lot. And folks ask us, particularly the folks that are thinking about selling their business, they're saying, "Hey, what are the various options when I'm what are the various exits that I have when I'm selling my business?" I think a lot of owners think, "Hey, I'm going to sell my business for all cash. I'm going to have some very short transition period, and then I'm out." And a lot of owners think that that's the only option, and maybe they don't like that. Maybe they actually do want to stay involved, and other owners think that that is the only option, and that's absolutely what they want, and that's really not that realistic. And so we're going to kind of talk through today the various exit scenarios for a business, like what some of that structuring can look like, and what you should expect, and sort of the trade-offs of some of that. And we're going to do it in like the form of a spectrum. So it's like, hey, the least involved exit all the way to what is the most involved and what that looks like. So anyway, I'm really excited to jump into this. Stephen, talk to us about option one. What is the least involved? What is the kind of first step in this?
Yeah, so I would say on average, this first option is most common with the older the owner is. So just typically, right? So the older the owner is, the more likely it is they want to just go play with the grandkids.
Yeah.
They're ready to kind of hang it up. They've worked in the industry for decades. They've loved it, but they are ready to go ahead and move on. And so that most typically is going to have less structuring, meaning, and we'll talk about different types of structuring as we go, but it's probably more cash heavy. It might mean that it's a lower overall multiple or a lower overall purchase price. The more that, someone's demanding all cash, no seller note, no earnout, no rollover equity, anything that you might, kind of have as a part of a structure. They're just looking for cash. They want to go play golf. They want to, play with the grandbabies. And so there's, like Collin said, trade-offs. And where you're typically going to trade the most there with as little involvement post-sale as possible is your headline purchase price. Is we're probably going to sacrifice a little bit there.
Yeah, I think that the key phrase to remember here is you can dictate pricing or you can dictate terms, which you're probably not going to be able to dictate both. And so I would even just as an aside, from a structuring perspective, irrespective of age, if your goal is to sell the business for all cash with no structuring, meaning no earnout, no holdback, no seller note, no rolled equity, you're going to get a lower valuation. Because there's no risk mitigation for the buyer of the business. And so I would tell anybody selling their business, unless you need all of that cash on day one, which there are good reasons for that, by the way. Like if you have a financial reason that you need the full purchase price then that's fine. Do that. But I would say if you don't need all, like if you're going to sell your business for $3 million up front, and it's like, okay, I could either sell it for 3 million up front or I could get 4 million over some period of time. I would say always go um, for the larger amount, not always, but under the right circumstances. And I think it's also important to realize that that's dependent on your specific financial situation and also your level of trust in the seller. And what I think we hear, or sorry, in the buyer, what we hear a lot from sellers is, well, I want to do all cash because I don't really trust the buyer. Like I'm not really sure what they're going to do with my business. And so then my argument would be, then don't sell to them. Like if you don't think that they're going to be a good custodian of your business, go find somebody that is going to be a good custodian of your business that is almost certainly going to get you to that valuation that you need to be able to hit your thresholds. So option one, all cash, no consideration, and a very quick 90-day transition. But I probably wouldn't do that unless you absolutely need that cash up front. And and I would make sure you're kind of really vetting who you're selling to. So that would be kind of the first step. That would be that very far end of the spectrum. Taking the next step forward, Stephen, would you say would be like a more classic deal, especially in the RMR space, which would be, we'll say 75% of it in cash, and then the remaining amount would be in some holdback of some type, right? Like an RMR holdback would be like a traditional way, right?
Yeah, if it's a more RMR specific deal, the value, the valuation method for the transaction is RMR. It's a multiple of RMR. Then you're typically going to look at 10 to 15% holdback, and then based on the size, maybe there is some additional structuring in there. There could be part of a seller note or something like that. But you'll typically maybe if you have some issues around contracts or if there's some heavy revenue concentration. Actually, we've seen that before where it's a standard RMR deal, but guess what? Their largest customer makes up 34% of their RMR. So there might be a larger holdback, 25%, or I've even seen deals where they're basically matching the holdback to that really intense revenue concentration, or getting close. So that is kind of the next step. Now, that doesn't necessarily impact like post-sale activity, which we talked about, and we'll talk about a little bit more in more depth in the next one or two scenarios. You still in that case might be doing a 60, 90, 120 day transition, maybe a little longer. Like with Alarm Masters, when we did our original acquisition, the owners like love them to death. They were around, if you kind of average it out, around for 6 months or so. One of them was around a little bit longer than the other. And so there's a lot of variety within that, but the amount of holdback doesn't necessarily change what that timeline would look like.
Yeah, I think one caveat before we move on to the next window would be if you're selling your business and your business is going to be a platform business, meaning you're selling it to, like, for example, we're pursuing deals in Dallas right now. Those are going to be platform businesses for us. We're going to keep the employees. We're going to keep the branding. Like that's going to be a brand new platform. It's not going to be rolled into necessarily like the Alarm Masters umbrella being supported by Alarm Masters employees. There will certainly be some like back office support or whatever, but you've got to be thinking about that because those are very different, right? So like if I'm purchasing a business in Houston and I'm tucking it in or adding it into Alarm Masters, the amount of help that we need from the seller is going to be really low because we really just need help getting data and getting some clarification on some very account specific things, but it'd be like really 30 days. And then after that, it's really just one-off stuff.
Trails off. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you're selling it as a platform, your expectation should be, and again, that's going to be dependent on who your buyer is. Right. So if you're selling it on a platform, you're likely going to get a better price for your company, but you're also going to have to be more involved. And by the way, anything you're doing, whether or not you're staying on as an employee or a consultant, which you should totally like, there's pros and cons to being a consultant or an employee, and you should like check with your attorney on that. And we've had sellers be like, no, we have to be W-2 employees. I don't know that you act like, I don't know that there's a tremendous amount of reasons for that. There's some tax specific reasons that you may want that, but honestly, it's usually cleaner if it's a consulting agreement. But either way, you want that transition agreement very well documented. And if you've got a good transaction attorney, they're going to make sure that that is documented. And usually it works like, hey, 90 days of transition at low to no cost, and then consulting on an hourly basis after that is very standard.
Yep.
Agree or disagree?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that that kind of captures that second type of scenario pretty well.
Yeah. Okay, scenario 3. Talk to us. What's scenario 3?
Scenario 3 is going to be, I would say, like, I want to maximize the value. So,
Yeah.
like, someone who's focused on maximizing their purchase price
Yeah.
or capturing as much potential upside as they can, short of actually
equity.
rolling equity
Yeah,
into
agreed.
the business.
Yeah.
So
Heavily structured.
in this heavily structured, in this scenario, the two most common things that we'd be talking about are a seller note. So you're carrying some part of that purchase price. Typically, it's like simple interest over a period of years that you are kind of acting as the bank. There's some tax advantages to that, like Colin said earlier. If you don't need all the money right now, and we can create a structure that gets you more over the course of time,
Yeah.
you're also going to spread your tax hit there,
Yeah.
which is kind of nice, and you're paid an appropriate amount of interest
Yep.
as well for kind of acting as the bank, and that's typically not contingent. There are contingent seller notes, but most commonly there's no contingency within that seller note structure. It is a kind of guaranteed note. So there's that. So let's kind of make something up. And this isn't inherently like a structure we've used, but I'm going to make it up so it's like extra simple.
Yeah.
So let's say it's a business being sold for $4 million.
Yeah.
And you're going to be paid, and it might really be worth more like 3.5, but you really are trying to get to that $4 million number. So you're willing to be a little flexible and take a little bit of risk. So in that scenario, $2 million, $2.5 million of cash at close. Let's do that. So let's say $2.5 million cash at close.
Yeah.
$1 million seller note.
Mhm.
Again, it's not contingent. It's guaranteed, and it's over a period of 3 years, 4
Yeah.
years. Paid typically quarterly or semi-annual. Could be annual if you came to that agreement. I would say semi-annual is probably the most common.
Yeah.
And then the last piece of that, so you got to 3.5, whereas like, where's the other 500K?
Yeah.
Is most typically based on the performance. However the transaction was valued. If it was an EBITDA-based sale, then it's probably most typically based on earnings for that next 12 months post-sale.
Mhm.
And you can capture up to $500,000 additional dollars.
Yeah.
That would be paid typically 30 or 60 days after that 12-month period. And you do a look back and
Yeah.
it's audited, whatever. And so that's how you could capture additional upside.
Yep.
So again, if you go back to scenario 1, you're like, no, seller note, crazy. Earnout, even crazier. Well, congrats. Like,
Yeah.
you probably sold your business for $3 to $3.2 million.
Yeah.
And go play golf, go, swim in the pool with the kids,
Yep.
grandkids. So then the risk is escalating, so to
Yeah.
speak, which again goes back to your point.
Yeah.
Who am I selling to?
Yeah.
Do I believe that they are a good steward of my business? Right.
Yeah.
And then the last scenario, which we'll go to in a moment, it's continuing to kind of escalate your risk appetite
Yeah.
and how much you're trying to kind of maximize the full potential value.
And there's a lot of levers in that. So like the seller note, most commonly a non-contingent seller note, the risk is pretty low there. What you're really going to be looking for is, where do I sit in the debt stack? You're almost every time you're going to be less than subordinate to senior lender. That's just common. It's the way it is. But the other thing you really are worried about in that scenario is this company and are these operators going to totally tank the business? That's really what your fear is. And if that's a very, very low likelihood, then a seller note is usually going to be in your favor, because you're going to get a little bit of interest, not a lot less than you think. You're thinking it should be 7 to 9%. It's probably going to be 3 to 5%. And again, that's negotiable.
Depends on where we're at from a macroeconomic perspective.
Yeah, that's a fair point. But then the earnout is another thing where it's like, you're probably going to have an earnout. Again, it depends on your type of business. And again, you can negotiate on that. That a lot of times it's built on an EBITDA basis, but you may say, "Hey, I don't want it to be based on EBITDA because they're going to invest a bunch of cash into the business, and they're not managing for earnings, they're managing for growth." So in
Yeah.
that scenario, you wouldn't want to do it on an EBITDA basis. You'd want to do it on a gross profit or a revenue. And there's some different things you can do there, right? Like you can structure that earnout to be as protective or complex as you need it to be. And again, it goes back to your relationship with the sellers, and sorry, the buyers. And that's really important. And the other thing, I think a couple other levers when you sit in this world of heavily structured, now you're getting into like, hey, start negotiating on working capital. So that's the amount of money that you are required to leave in your bank account. Like if you're selling as a platform business, especially if you're selling on an EBITDA basis, you're going to have to leave some cash in the bank account as a working capital to make the business run. And there's some kind of industry standards for that. But you can negotiate on that. You could say, hey, I'm willing
Sure.
to leave more working capital in the business to get a higher valuation. Again, depends on how much cash you need up front. And then the other thing is an employment agreement. Um, I think a lot of sellers anticipate that if they're going to have an employment agreement, they're going to be paid the exact same that they were paid before the sale, and that's almost certainly not going to happen. Again, everything is negotiable, but you can't have price and terms. So you've got to have to pick somewhere in here. It's like, hey, we're not going to do an earnout. We are going to do a seller note. I'll leave a decent amount of working capital in, but I want a high salary or I want really
Yeah.
good benefits because I'm waiting to get to something. Like all of those things, these are all levers.
Yeah.
You're going to have to give somewhere. The buyers are going to have to give somewhere. Like it's just all negotiable. So
I would also say, frankly, the larger your business is, the more competitive processes or, um, we know that certain types of RMR are more sought after.
yeah,
Like fire is
yep,
heavily pursued and
yeah,
typically competed on, and
yeah,
those deals. So
yeah,
if you have a little bit of leverage as a seller, like, hey, I'm the really pretty girl at the dance.
yeah,
Let's be honest.
yeah,
You can probably be a little more aggressive in your asks, within reason.
yeah,
And then the last thing I'll say is, not always, but more often, when there is a fairly significant earnout, a lot of times that looks like the seller being involved for a longer period of time.
yeah,
That might be a year.
yeah,
During that year earnout period,
yeah.
you may be, you know, more engaged than you would if you were just had a more simple structure for a slightly lower price and you were walking away.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important call out. Yeah, and I think that it's important to realize too that like you can go again, all of it's a lever. So you should go shop this around. You should go interview a bunch of different sellers and buyers, keep saying that. You should interview a bunch of different buyers. And if you're really passionate about a certain buyer, but they can't get to the dollar, again, you've got to decide what's the most important thing to you and like
Yeah.
what is your risk appetite. And probably you're not going to get all of the things. And I think isn't the adage like a good deal is one where everybody walks away a little bit unhappy? Isn't that like
Hmm.
yeah? So I think that that's like a
Yeah.
really
One one other thing that we didn't talk about, but I do want to bring up because we've had it come up so many times, is maintaining the brand or company name
hmm
as a part of a term. And so again, there's all these different elements: price, term, and you have to really decide what hill you're going to die on, or what
yeah,
thing you are. We had a deal last year that did not pan out because the seller, late in the process, decided, I just cannot stomach an earnout.
yeah,
And it was pretty sensible to us based on a lot of things.
yeah,
There was some revenue concentration there. An earnout was pretty appropriate. Trying to be as unbiased as I can be,
yeah,
and it blew up the deal.
yeah,
And so you've got to figure out, hey, I will not sell to someone who's going to wipe my dad's name off the sign.
yeah,
Okay. Well, then you just decrease your kind of buyer pool some,
yeah,
but there's a
hmm
lot of people like us, like we see a lot of value in legacy brand names.
yeah,
It might have a tagline, an Alarm Masters company, but we like to keep
yeah,
the kind of core brand name. So
hmm
that's just another example.
yeah. No, that's a great example. I totally agree. I think that the next category that's really important to talk about is This would be maybe the scenario for people that are maybe um, not as far along, or like they're not ready to retire, right? So
Yeah.
they're and again yeah, so they may be ready to retire or not, but this is going to give you the most upside, and this is typically reserved for when you're joining a larger platform based company, right? So like this would be all of the structuring is still probably going to be involved. And one element would be also rolled equity, which would mean instead of taking some of that in cash, some of that in a seller note, or some of that in an earnout, you're actually going to still be an owner in that business.
Yeah.
This is where the spectrum just unlocks, because there's so much
Yeah.
levels here. You could have voting or non-voting shares. You could be on the board or not on the board. You
Different
could have
classes of stock.
different
Yeah.
classes of stock, pref payments that are coming out. There's so many things that are involved in that. But if you really believe in the platform that you're selling your business to, and they've got a track record of growth and a good plan, and they've got an exit, again, that's the big one, right? It's like if they've got an exit criteria of when they want to exit, then rolling equity is a really good option, especially if you don't need the cash right now.
Yeah.
Where the rolling the equity thing gets really tricky is if you're buying it to somebody like it's their first business. It's like, hey, it's a searcher. It's somebody that's looking to buy their first business. They've never stepped into the waters before. They don't have a track record of success or growth. They want to hold it for a long time. And it's like, well, I don't want to hold the business for 10 years, because then the value of your equity is pretty worthless if you aren't getting a pref payment and they're not going to sell it for the next decade. That rolled equity is just paper. So
Yeah.
you've just got to really be specific if you're rolling the equity on who you're selling to and what their track record is. And they don't have to be a big private equity buyer. If it's, like if it's a deal where there's somebody buying, if you've got a company that's trying to expand from Oklahoma into Texas or whatever, and it's like they've got a track record of growth and they're a major player in their market, like that's great. You should consider that.
Yeah. I think that you'll hear the phrase second bite at the apple. So that concept is I'm going to take a lot of chips off the table now. And then I'm hoping that, a lot of rolled equity is in that 15 to 20% range.
Mm-hmm.
It can be higher, but I would say the standard, you'll see a lot like 20%.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are essentially making an investment forward into
Yeah.
your buyer,
Yep.
is how to think about that. Because you believe that it's like owning the whole grape or half the watermelon,
Right.
that, that
Yep.
ultimately the way that nets out, you win
Yep.
because you made more in the end. And
Mm-hmm.
you had the time. Like, is an 80-year-old owner going to roll equity? Probably not. Like, it's happened before, but
Yeah.
it's less likely. Is a 45-year-old owner going to consider that more, who still wants to stay in the industry? And yeah, it's more likely, more common,
Yeah.
something that you might consider more if that's where you are right
Yeah.
now. So
I think there's one other tier, which we didn't talk about this because I'm throwing a curveball, but I actually think there's another tier, which is not selling the whole value of your business. There's a reality where you
mhm.
could just sell a minority share of your business
Yes.
and stay on as the majority owner, the CEO. You continue to run the business. You take some chips off the table. Maybe you use some of that cash to inject growth to go buy another business. But you're saying, hey, I've been in this industry for 20 years. I'm growing. I don't necessarily want to sell my whole business. I really like where it's
Mhm.
going. I really want to actualize the value, but I do want to take some chips off the table. Like, I want to mitigate. I want to go fund my kids' college fund. I want to go buy that vacation house. I want to set myself up basically for my emergency parachute, so that if all things go wrong, I've got that cash. There is
Yeah.
another scenario where you sell a minority share of your business. And what is almost certainly going to happen is the person that you sell minority share to is going to have a first right of refusal to buy the remaining equity in your business. So you really want to make sure you trust that group. And you have that structured, right? Like you have some amount of like, what is that right of first refusal actually look like? What are you actually
Mhm.
bound to? And there's probably gonna be some pref payments involved in that. You're gonna be paying that stockholder some dividend. So get ready to share in some of the spoils of your business. But there is that intermediate step that I think a lot of people don't realize, that you can do that. If you want to sell your business in 10 years from now, you can take some of those chips off the table today
Yeah.
and still run the playbook. You're confident, you've got that track record of success, you've got that historical compounded annual growth. Like, that is an option that I think exists on the table that a lot of folks don't realize is available.
Yeah. that's I'm glad that you brought that up. I would say that's probably less available to our friends that are doing 240K of net income annually.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little more available of an option if you're doing $1 million plus of earnings
North of $1 million of
annually.
EBITDA. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 800K or something like,
Yeah.
but most typically, you know, a little over $1 million plus is where
Yeah.
that could start to be a real option
Yeah.
for you. So that's a good addition.
Yeah, agreed. That's a fair point. So I think the moral of the story is, if you're thinking about, because like, again, on the last episode we talked specifically about, like, you've got to decide what the end goal is for your business and the timeline. Like, we have no plans to sell the business anytime soon, so our goal is we're going to always have our business in a place that it could be sold, because I think that's a healthy business. But that our frame of reference is a longer term than somebody else that maybe is trying to sell their business in 2 to 3 or even 5 years. And so I think that having knowledge of these scenarios, and a good broker, if you're using a broker, can help educate you on some of these things.
Yeah.
But again, you should go in educated. You should go in knowing what your options are, so that you can speak, a little bit more intelligently, and you can kind of protect yourself. And again, obviously, getting a good transaction attorney is going to really help some of that. That not the person that's doing your alarm contract, and not the person that's doing your HR disputes, and not your family attorney, an actual transaction attorney.
Actual
And
M&A.
if you're going to use
Yeah.
a broker, use a real broker. Like, don't use somebody that you know that has help. Like, use somebody that's got a lot of transactions under the belt, and having that team is going to help you kind of work through some of that.
Yeah.
Any
Great.
closing thoughts?
My last thought is, if you are in this place, to also go speak to friends in the industry that have sold.
Yeah.
I just think that you're going to learn a lot, glean a lot from talking to people who have gone through that whole process. And so that's another, kind of good action item.
Yeah, and also, like, reach out to us. We're happy to help. We have not sold our business and have no plans to do that, but we have bought a lot of businesses and have a lot of discussion with folks, and know a lot of people who have sold their business, and can make recommendations on great brokers and transaction attorneys, and kind of ping pong some of these things that you may have. And, like, we're happy to chat through that. And while you're doing that, if you could subscribe, like our videos, just engage with our content in any way, is always super appreciated.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. We appreciate y'all.